Hi everyone, welcome to the Swift Arcade. I'm your host, Jonathan Rasmussen. Today we're going to continue our UI collection view journey and take a look at how to build something like this. This is a nice compositional view. It's got a badge in the upper right hand corner, and in this episode we're going to take a look at how to add badges, a new concept called a supplementary view, and how just to go ahead and build this type of layout. Okay, let's begin. Now to lay this out, what we're really going to need to do is a couple of things. First, we're going to need a cell that represents this blue box here. This is going to be what we're going to call our text cell. It's just going to contain a label with the item identifier for where we are in our collection. And then we're going to create another view. This one we're going to call badge supplementary view right here in the upper right hand corner. It too is going to have a label. We're going to color it green, and that's going to represent our badge. So we're going to create two views here, a text cell, a badge supplementary view, and then we'll use those with our compositional layout in our UI collection view and register those as items that we can then pull and use in our collection view. Now, if you need a complete refresher on the UI collection view compositional layout, check out the previous video I just put up there last week. It's going to walk you through that through excruciating detail, how to set these up. We're still going to build them from scratch here, but I'm going to move a little bit faster and just assume you know a couple things about compositional layout. Okay, but let's jump over to the lab now and see how we can build this from scratch. Okay, so let's fire up Xcode and go Shift-Command-N to create a brand new project. Let's make this a single view app. Just going to resize my windows here. And I'm going to call this, let's see, how about badge demo? And you can stick that wherever you like. I'm just going to stick it on my desktop here. Let's just open up the view controller and we'll start doing our layout here. Okay, so first, why don't we go ahead and build the view, which is going to represent this blue text cell here. So I'm going to do this all in one class. I'm just going to start here. And let's just start by creating a text cell. And this is going to be of type UICollectionView cell. That's a nice cell we can use within our collection views. And in here, let's just go ahead and define a label. So we've got a simple label here. We're going to need a reuse identifier for it, so we can dequeue it and use that over and over again in our collection view. And then we're just going to need a couple of initializers to go ahead and set that up. And then I'm going to create an override extension down here where we can actually do our configuration. Whoops. I'm going to go Control I just to fix this layout. It looks like I've got an extra bracket here. There we go. And down here in this extension, let's go ahead and lay out this view. So as an extension text cell, you don't have to put this method here. I'm just doing it because this is what some others like to do. Not everyone in Swift knows you can actually put methods in extensions like this. It's just a nice way sometimes to break up your code. And down here, let's go ahead and configure and do the layout for this text cell. Okay, so we've got a blue text cell here. We want that label just to sit in the middle of it. And I'm just going to design it so that label is just going to be flush to the top and the bottom and the left and the right. So because we're doing this with auto layout, I'm just going to go label.translates auto resizing mask into constraints. This is something we always want to be set to false. I'm going to create a little bit more room here by going Option Command 0 and just getting rid of that menu. In fact, I'm also going to get rid of that menu on the left-hand side by going Command 0. Nice little shortcuts just to make a little bit more space. And now let's continue with this label. Let's set up some nice font resizing capabilities. This is a nice little feature that will let our fonts resize themselves if someone changes the size of the font on our device. This will automatically adjust it. Let's add our label to the content view. And then let's give it a nice font, something like a nice UI preferred font. These are all built in right into iOS. These are nice to use. And let's call this a caption. Let's design some nice little insets here to give this some spacing. This is going to be a CG float. And with that, we are now ready to do some auto layout. Now we're just going to make this label go right to the edges of all the different areas here. And in auto layout, we can do that with 4 constraints that look just like this. So basically what we're saying is this is an array where we can bundle up our auto layout constraints into one and just lay these out, and it's activating them. And here we're just going to go leading, trailing, top, bottom. We're going to take our label and pin it to the edges of the content view, and that's going to make our label basically fill this text cell. And at that point, we've got a text cell that's laid out and ready to go. Okay, next let's take a look at how we can design this little green badge up here. Now this is just going to be like any other view, like our text cell is a view of type UI collection. We're going to create another class here for that badge. So let's go ahead and define something called a badge supplementary view. And this also is going to be of type UICollectionView cell. Now that word there, supplementary, is actually important. That's an abstraction that the collection view uses. We're going to be adding this particular view as a supplementary view to our collection view. That's why you see me using that word here. And you'll see what I mean around how that works in a second. Now I'm just going to copy in some code here just in the interest of time to speed things up just a little bit. And what I've got here is just like any other collection view cell, we always need a reuse identifier. This is how iOS optimally reuses views very, very quickly. Like in a table view collection and in a collection view, we take these cells, we reuse them, and we need an identifier to identify this. So that's what this string here represents. This badge we're designing is really just a label with some radiuses applied to give it that circular view. We're going to change the border basically. So we're just going to define this. Here's just a constructor to initialize this cell. This is something we need just because by default, if we were using storyboards, this is something that iOS would want us to persist to disk, but we don't need to worry about that. Just something we need to implement. And then because we're going to set the border from the outside sometimes, like when we actually dequeue the cell, these are 2 computed properties that are just going to redraw our border if the frame or the bounds changes. And I'll show you where we do that later. Now that we've got that, all we need to do is lay this thing out. And let's just see what that would look like in auto layout. So down here, I'm going to go ahead and just create another extension on badge supplementary item. And this is where we're going to do our auto layout work. And let's just walk through and I'll show you what's going on here. So it's auto layout. So we just instantly set our resizing mask to false. We do that nice thing we did above with our font. We're going to let the size adjust itself. We're going to add to that subview our label. Now the difference between adding a subview here and adding a content view up here is content view, when we go content view.add subview, that's really the entire view for that cell. So by us adding this label like this here, we're really saying, label, I want you to fill that entire super view of the UI collection view. When we go add subview label down here, we're adding label as a subview to the view. That's a subtle little difference. Why would we want to do that here? Well, because we're going to be styling borders and doing some other things. I'm just doing it as a subview here. But up here, I want it to fill the entire contents. That's why I went content view, add subview up here. If you're wondering, it's a subtle difference, but that's what's going on there. Okay, so we can add our label as the subview, and then we basically want our badge, this nice little number here, just to sit directly in the middle. So we can add 2 constraints there for center X and center Y. Then we can give it a nice font of type size body. We can center the text, give it some colors, and then here's where we configure the border. So here, what we can do is we can take the bounds of our view. That's really the thing enclosing our view, or the bounds. And if we just half it, we can get the radius. And then we can apply a quarter radius here and basically say, make the radius of our layer here equal to this calculation here, give it a color, and give it a width of 1. So that's how we're really styling and laying out this badge. It's a number with those colors with a nice little circle going around it here. And that's our badge supplementary view. Okay, so this is great. At this point, we've got our text field, we've got our badge. Now we're ready to go down into the view controller and take a look at how to set things up. Specifically, we're going to create a data model, which represents one of these cells. We're going to set it up as a diffable data source, and then we're going to connect that to our collection view. Okay, let's take a pause, grab a coffee, and then jump in and see how to do that. Okay, so to set things up here, I'm just going to copy in some code. I'm just going to get rid and override the view did load here. And let's see how we can actually go about setting up one of these view controllers to actually do this layout. Okay, so basically to reuse these identifiers as a supplementary view, we're going to need some way of identifying and registering this cell with a type kind. And we're going to call that a badge element kind. That is basically just a string we're going to use to associate this badge as a unique identifier with our collection view. You'll see what I mean on how we do that in a second. Because we're using a diffable data source, every diffable data source needs a section. So I'm just defining an enum here with case main section. We're just having one, but this is just kind of how you do it. And then here's our model. This is going to be just a simple struct, which is going to contain our title and our badge. So basically the information we need to lay this out here. And we're going to create that as a struct. It has to be hashable because diffable data sources need a way of uniquely identifying every one of these cells with some kind of ID or a number. And that's what hashable does for us. And this is how you do this in Swift. You just make your model implement the hashable protocol, and then you have a hashing function here, which for us is just going to take our unique identifier here and use that number to represent one of these cells. And then down here is where we start getting into the fun stuff. This is where we're going to create our data source with two generics, our section here representing our enum and of type model. So our model, one of these is going to be tied to and associated with every item in our data source. And eventually we're going to tie that data source to that collection view when we create it. So that's just kind of the framework for how we're setting up data sources and collection views for this view controller here. We're then going to have two methods where we're going to configure the hierarchy for the view controller and also set up our data source. Okay, so to set this up, let's start by just laying out the collection view in the view controller here. So I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to use this extension technique where I'm just going to extend our view controller. And I'm going to add the method to actually configure this hierarchy down here. I'm just going to copy paste some code in here and let's just quickly see what's going over here. So here's where we're actually going to instantiate our collection view. And this collection view, we're just going to go to all the bounds of the view controller. So in this way we're doing it, it's going view bounds, collection view layout. We have yet to define our collection view layout. That's what's going to define how many items we go across here, those items in groups. We're going to do that in a second. And then we're basically using a springs and structs technique, not auto layout here, to basically take the collection view, use its auto resizing mask and say, hey, I'd like to have a flexible width and height to basically fill up this view controller, set the background color. And then here's really the interesting stuff. Here's where we register those cells that we created here with our collection view. So this is something you're going to do all the time with collection view. Every time you create a view that you want to associate with an item in there, you need to register it with the unique identifier. So in our case, we're going to register a text cell with a string text cell reuse identifier here. So that string is going to uniquely represent this type here of text cell. That's how we're going to dequeue that. And then we also need to do that with our badge supplementary view, our little green dot here. So we're going to register it, but this one's a little bit different. Take a look at this method signature. This is for a supplementary view of kind. So here we're just registering a cell with an identifier. So this is just a generic cell for this one, but this one's special. We're calling this a supplementary view. So this is some language and an abstraction that CollectionView has is you can add these things called supplementary views, which is what our badge is. And we have to do that. There's one extra identifier we need to uniquely identify that. One, we have the reuse identifier just representing the view here. This is our badge reuse identifier. But with these supplementaries, you also have something called a kind. And a kind is what uniquely identifies the kind of supplementary view you're adding to the collection view. And here we're calling it badge element kind. That's just a string we define in our view controller. Later on, we're going to take a look at how to add headers and views also to collection views. They are also just kinds. So you can have a header kind, a footer kind, and in this case, we're just having a badge kind. So that's what this registration is doing. It's a supplementary view of kind whose reuse identifier is this, and that is what's going to uniquely identify that badge and allow us to use it later. And then down here, we're just taking the collection view we've created, adding it to the subview of the view controller. And at this point, we've got a collection view, which is going to go to all the edges of the view controller set up to use these two types. Okay, next, let's take a look at how to set up the data source. Okay, UI diffable data sources are a little bit strange when you first see them because there's a lot going on there and it's not always clear. So let's slowly walk through how to create up the data that's going to supply our collection view here using one of these really powerful things called a diffable data source. So basically in here, I am going to go ahead and define this other function. This is going to be our configure data source. And let's just take a look at basically what we need to do in here. And there's two things. One is we need to configure the data source for our cell to describe what cell is going to be returned whenever our data source asks us for one of these guys. And then secondly, we need to set up the data source also for that supplementary view, our green badge here. So there's going to be two parts to this. Let's start with the cell one though. And when we configure a data source like this, so we've already defined our data source as a variable here. It's going to be of collection view diffable data source with two types here, our section and our model. And in here, this is the constructor or how we initialize this. And what we need to do here is basically return the cell that we want to be associated with this diffable data source. But this is really neat how they do this. When we define one of these things, they define a callback where basically it's a block of code where they pass you the collection view, the index path, and in our case, the model. So this is nice. They're going to pass us the model that we define up here, our hashable model. It's going to be of title and badge count in there. It's going to be smart enough to pass that to us and say, hey, just return me the cell now that you want to use this model, and I'll lay it out for you. So to do that, first of all, let's just go ahead and make sure we get a cell of our correct kind. So to do that, let's just basically dequeue and get our cell. And let's see what this line of code is doing here. So we're going to our collection view and we're saying, hey, I'm going to dequeue or reuse the cell of this type identifier. This is going to be our text cell. And I'd like you to return that and unwrap that as a text cell for me. So basically this is an optional. When we go dequeue, we can optionally pull out the cell we want here, cast it into type of text cell. And if there's a problem, we can fatal error. We probably wouldn't want to do that here in production code, but I'm just doing it for simplicity here. And that is how we can get the cell out for this collection view. So there, we've got our cell. Now we need to populate it with our data. So because we've got our model passed into us already, this is kind of nice. We can take our cell, which is going to be of type text cell, and just use it. So we can set the label to contain the model of our title here, which is just going to be our number here. We can do some backgrounds, some color. Here's where we could change the border width and radius if we wanted. That's why we had to override those computed variables up here. When we call those, that's going to bump the frame and adjust the bounds, and that's going to reconfigure our border based on how we do that if we ever got resized or something. And then we can center the text. We can adjust the font size if we want. Here we can bump it up to a title 1, and then we can return that cell. So that's just the text cell portion now of our collection view here. We're returning it. It's populated with a number. Next, we need to return or configure this supplementary type cell. And this is really strange in how they do this. This is called a supplementary view provider. Check this out. Just going to paste this in to save some time, but we'll walk through it really carefully to explain what's going on. So in our data source here, we've got our cell of type here. But when it comes to supplementary view providers, we basically have to provide a block, which basically returns a collection reusable view. That's our supplementary view item here. So in this block here, let's walk through this. First thing you'll notice is this week.self. Okay, what is that? That's called a capture list. And basically in Swift, this is how we make sure that we don't have a strong retain cycle, or that the code out here strongly retains something within this block, so we don't get something where we're basically leaking memory. So by going week self here on this capture list, we're basically saying I'm going to have a reference to myself in here, but it's going to be weak. It's going to be optional, but that's how we make sure we don't have a retain cycle. And then the rest of this is it's providing us the collection view for our supplementary item. Here it's giving us the kind that it's looking for, so we can figure out what type of supplementary view to return based on its kind, and then the index path of which item it's talking about. And what we have to return is a collection reusable view here. So that's what's going on all in this. So in this first line here, we just have some guards. First, we unwrap self, so we don't have to keep optionally unwrapping it internally. We're just going to unwrap it and give it an unwrapped version of self. We can then go to our model, and from our data source for that identifier, that index path, we can grab our model. And then here, we can just do a quick check to see if it has a badge count. So if our model badge count is greater than 0, we go, yeah, it's got a badge count. And you'll see why that's important later, because not every item here has a badge count. But if it does, here's where we get the supplementary view. We go to our collection view, and just like we did before, we dequeue a reusable item, but this one is a reusable supplementary view. So up here, we dequeued a reusable cell, but down here, we're dequeuing a reusable supplementary item. And when we do that, it's going to tell us what kind, the identifier, and the path. And this is how we get or tell it, hey, I'm going to give you, because I want to use a badge supplementary view. So basically what we're saying here is if I can pull out a badge supplementary view based on this identifier, now I've got a cell or a badge that I can populate. I can set its label to be the count of the badge. If there's no count for that badge count, I can hide it based on that Boolean we set up here. Then we can simply return that view, and that's how it's now got a reusable view associated with that cell. Now we haven't done any layout yet. We haven't said where the cell is positioned or how it looks relative to the cell. We're going to do that in create layout next. But basically these are the two steps we go through to get the cell here using dequeue reusable cell, and then dequeuing a reusable supplementary item is how we pull that one out here. So it's kind of a two-step process here with these badges. One, you've got your cell. Two, you've got your supplementary item. And now that we can return those, now we can finally do the layout and see how these things work together. Actually, there is one more thing we need to do. We need to tell it how many sections and items we've got to basically fill this up. And the way we do that with the data source is through these things called snapshots. So this is how we load data for a diffable data source. We basically define our diffable data source, pass it in the section and model type. So this is how it knows what we are. We have a section which is going to have just one element there called main. Our type is going to be model. And we basically append sections. Here's our .main, and then we append data. So this is really a compact way of doing this all in one line. And this really comes from a WWDC video I studied. What they're doing here is we're basically saying we're going to add about 100 items here. We're going to map those to a model. So we're creating about 100 models here where the title is just going to be the number of our model here as we go from 0 to 99. And then the badge count, this is just a randomly generated badge count between 0 and 3. So that's why some of our badges have values here. Some have 1, some have 2, and some have 3. Just a randomly generated number. So this creates about 99 or 100 models for us. We append those to our snapshot, and then we apply that to our data source. So that's how we populate our data source. That's how we set the counts for all these text cells and these badge items. And now we're ready to actually go ahead and do the layout. Okay, when it comes to doing the layout for our badge items, there's basically two things we need to think about. One is how we're going to lay out this text cell here in our compositional view, and two, how we're going to lay out this actual badge. So basically we're going to say that we're going to lay out our cell having a flexible width of about 0.25 with a width of 1. That means we're going to put about 4 of these going across the top here. That's how we define 4. And then we also need to lay out specifically the badge. And for that, we're going to take our badge supplementary view. We're going to give it a height and width of about 20. And then we're going to position those relative to the item here. Sorry, what I mean by that is we're going to position this badge relative to this item here. And the supplementary view API has got some really nice ways of doing that. We're going to create what's called a badge anchor, and we're going to set its edge to be top and trailing. That's what's going to put it in the upper right-hand corner here. We're then going to give it a fractional offset of just about 0.3 in the X and Y direction. That's what's just going to nudge it over here. And then we're going to use that badge size, as I said, to basically set it absolutely to a height and width of 20. So that in a nutshell is what we're shooting for in the code. Let's go see what that looks like now. So going back to our code, we're now ready to actually fulfill this create layout method here. So let's just go define a function here called create layout. And this is where we're going to do our compositional layout. And let's start with our badges. So basically, here's really the most interesting part, the magic or the badge part. What we've got here is basically an anchor, a size, and then its badge itself. So here's our anchor. Here's where we're saying, I'd like that badge to sit in the upper right-hand corner. So we use these edges with a top and a trailing with a fractional offset of 0.3. That's what sticks it right up there in the corner. Then we give our badge a size. Everything has to be sized in a computational layout like this. So we absolutely size it with a size of 20 for width and height. And then basically now we create, this is a new abstraction for us here, an NSLayoutSupplementaryItem. This is a supplementary item, our badge, which is going to have a size, a kind. So this is where we associate the ID with this particular kind here. For us, it's a badge element kind. And what I'm doing when I click there is if you want to quickly jump to a definition, go Control, Command, click. That'll take you to the definition. And then to quickly jump back, I'm going Control, Command, left arrow. It's a little navigation tip. But basically, we've got our kind, and then we basically put our anchor. We define our anchor here, and that defines our badge. So at that point, we've got our badge set up. Now we need to set up our item. So our item or our text cell is going to look like this. Here we're saying, okay, fractionally, I'd like the width of the cell to be 0.25. So that's going to put 4 of these across here. I'd like the height to be full. So make that height, the item height, full within this group. And then give it a nice little content edge inset. That's what gives a little bit of spacing of 5 around all the sizes here. And then for our group, this is really where the layout actually kicks in. Group will always override what item does. But here we're basically saying, I'd like my group to go fully the full width across here, a width of 1 with a fractional width, a height dimension with a fractional width of 0.2. So no, that's kind of interesting. We're using a fractional width here with a height dimension, and that's fine. That's what gives it a slightly boxy area. If we made this 0.25, we could make these squares. But by going 0.2, we're giving just a little bit of a rectangular stretch this way, and that's how we define that group going across here. And then the rest is just mechanics. Once you've got your items and your groups defined, you just lay those out in sections, and those sections actually come back in layouts. You can add some additional content here, some content edge insets. So here we're just going 2020. Oh, and of course, when we create a layout, we actually need to return the layout. So I forgot to actually define our return type up here, UICollectionViewLayout. So that's how we define the layout for our collection view when we create it. This is the compositional layout piece. So here we just did our badge, we did our item, we put those in a group, we put those in a section, the section goes in the layout, and that's why it's called a compositional view. We're composing things of very small elements and then building them up bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, why don't we run this and see what we get? Ta-da, we do. Great, we've got a scrollable, nice, swipeable badge item here. We've got our counts. We've got a really cool layout that would be very difficult to do with a UI table view cell. We couldn't. And even doing this with, we could probably do this with a flow layout here, but compositional layout gives us a lot of nice affordances to kind of set these up and build this type of view. Okay, so there you have it, badge items in a compositional layout view. Do try typing out this code and going through it yourself. There's some little subtleties in there that you don't really appreciate until you go through and kind of build one of these things on your own. That's why I enjoy creating these videos so much. It's a great way for me to learn. So watch the video again, fire it up, and see if you can create a different view here. And maybe stick the badge in the left-hand corner, change the color, or do something different. Come back next time. We're going to take a look at how to do something similar to this, only with headers and footers. And we'll see how we can add headers and footers to our compositional views also. Okay, thanks for coming, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.